You're listening to Releasing Trauma, a survivor's podcast. And now here's your host, Tracy Osborne. Hey, welcome back to the show. You know, have you ever had where you're making progress, and then all of a sudden it just feels like you're right back where you started? You know, it's just kind of how healing and our journeys go, right? Well, Kari O'Driscoll is joining me today, and she's no different than the rest of us. She has learned to see her own personal evolution as an ever-expanding spiral. And, she does occasionally find herself back in a familiar place, but like you and me, we're a little bit smarter and we have a little bit more experience. So, Kari, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's awesome to be here. Thanks, Tracy.
You bet. I am excited to have you here. So, I guess I want to start, a little bit about, you have a history of childhood trauma and grief. And you ended up not only losing a sibling, but you watched your whole family fall apart and had to take on those caretaking roles for yourself and your siblings. So can you tell us a little bit about, what life was like back then?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I started out having a pretty typical suburban life in the 70s. And then through a series of unexpected and absolutely unpredictable events, one of my siblings was removed from the family and basically just disappeared when none of us ever saw him again. I was 8 years old at the time, and I was the middle kid. And that was the beginning of my family just basically falling apart. Within months, my parents were divorced. My dad had moved to a completely different state, and my mom descended into a pretty deep depression. And because of where I was in my own childhood development, I believed that it was my job to keep the rest of us together, myself and my other two siblings. My biggest fear was losing another one of us. And so it was a very frantic time. I would say probably for the next 10 years of my life until I left to go to college was this really constant looking over my shoulder, trying to pretend to all the adults on the outside, the school teachers and the other, adults in the family, that things were fine, nothing to see here, right? Because I was afraid that if somebody thought something was going on, that we would be broken up even further. So it was a pretty hyper vigilant, always on guard, waiting for the other shoe to drop kind of time for me.
So it sounds like you had to grow up pretty quickly. If this started around age 8, and you had to jump into that caretaker role at age 8 or thereabouts, you kind of took on the role of the oldest child, I think, where, the oldest child tends to be the caretaker and nurturer. And so it sounds like that's kind of what you ended up having to do.
Yeah, I did have an older brother. And I think there were 2 girls and 2 boys. And it was one of the boys that was taken away. So I think my older brother, not only the loss of his male sibling, but my dad, leaving the family and moving away. And, I think he became sort of paralyzed, and just was in this, I'm just going to keep doing my thing. I'm going to go to school. I'm going to get good grades. I'm going to, whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I think there was that, but there was also, definitely this was the 70s. There were some gender roles, right? So there was this part of me that was like, well, if we're going to get fed, I need to learn how to make chili. I need to, pack everybody's school lunches for the next day. If there's laundry that needs to be done, I better figure it out, So I took on, the bulk of the roles around just really keeping the household going, making sure my younger sister was dressed and to school on time. And, we lived in a pretty small town, and the teachers knew that if there was an issue, my sister sadly was a she was one of those kids that was a biter.
Oh, no.
And so if there were, and we were in the same elementary school. So the teachers knew, like, if my sister bit somebody, there was no point in calling my mom. They would just call me from my classroom, and I would come down to her classroom and go, So yeah, I became the mom of the family pretty early on.
That's, I have to say, it's incredibly unfair. I mean, I get it. I get depression. Totally get depression. And, my oldest daughter had to take on quite a lot of that as well when I was going through depression, not quite to the extent that you did, of course, but it's just, looking back at it, I feel terrible that, my child had to, take on my role because I couldn't. Did you ever, kind of have any resentment towards your mom, or, how did you feel towards mom for, kind of putting you in this situation, and towards dad for just up and leaving?
Yeah. I mean, I actually have a whole memoir about this time that came out in 2020. It's called Truth Has a Different Shape, but I had a lot of resentment towards my mom. And, part of my healing from all of this was really being able to honor that and being able to acknowledge it, right? Like, not necessarily getting in my parents' faces about it, but as an adult, being able to honor myself enough to say, hey, I deserved parents. I deserved mothering,
Sure.
I deserved to be taken care of. And so, yeah, I think it was important for me to have those moments where I acknowledged my rage and where I acknowledged the grief that went along with, things could have been different. It didn't have to be that way. And yet then, this sort of next part of that spiral is coming around to, and it was. And, I can see, especially when I had my own children, I had some pretty severe postpartum depression after my first child. And I could have that realization that my mom couldn't have done anything differently. She just couldn't, there's no way, as much as I want to go back and make it one of those choose your own adventure books, and pick a different route. It couldn't have been a different way. I mean, she was doing what she needed to do. My dad had been in Vietnam and had pretty severe PTSD from his years in Vietnam. And he couldn't have done anything differently either. We were all doing exactly what we needed to do in order to be able to survive.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I think it was important for me to really immerse myself in all of that, like to be able to say, yeah, I am filled with rage. And the reason that I started writing, that I didn't mean for it to be a memoir, but then it turned into a memoir. But the reason that I started writing was because in 2004, my father was diagnosed with a really aggressive form of lung cancer. And I spent 2 years really caretaking for him. So I started to grapple with the oh, great, here I am again, caretaking for a parent, but this time it was a choice. And it was lovely. And it was some of the sweetest moments I've ever had in my life. And then after my dad died, my mom went into early onset Alzheimer's. And I was enraged yet again. It was like, seriously? Like, this is the time you're supposed to be supporting me as a grandparent and helping me, and here I am again, right?
Yeah, you just can't catch a break, can you?
No. So it definitely was that spiral kind of, here I am again. Oh, maybe I'm just destined to be a caretaker. But what I was able to do in sort of metabolizing all of that grief and rage that I had was to make it a choice and to make it something where I knew what I was doing this time. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't survival. It wasn't like, oh my God, the world is going to come to an end if I don't do this. It was, I have affection for you. I have a tenderness for you. And I see that you are in need. So I'm grateful that I was able to give myself the grace to feel all that whole range of feelings.
Well, and I mean, it's not your mom's fault. It really isn't. She can't help the depression. She definitely couldn't help the Alzheimer's. It's just kind of a, the hand that life dealt both of you. But so, as you grew up, you graduated from high school and in your early 20s and stuff. How was that relationship with your mom? Was it, I'm assuming it was pretty strained.
I left. I mean, I graduated high school at 17, and my younger sister was the only one who was still at home. And I distinctly remember a moment where I grabbed my mom by the shoulders and I said to her, "Tag, you're it. I'm out and I'm not coming back. Like, I have done this for 10 years.
Yep.
And I'm exhausted, and college is my ticket out. So you're either going to suck it up and start parenting this kid, or you're not, but I'm done." And so, yeah, I left. I didn't come back for summer vacation. I didn't come back for Thanksgiving. I didn't come back for Christmas. I knew myself well enough to know that if I didn't make a clean break with that overwhelming day-to-day caretaking of other people, that I was never going to do it.
Right.
And so I felt like this was sort of my time. And, that's not to say, I mean, my mom and I still would talk on the phone. I would call her from the dorm phone on Sunday night and check in. And, but it was hard. She was not able to, I think, really step up and parent my sister in a way that my sister needed to be parented. And so things were chaotic for a really, really long time. And I had a great deal of guilt about abandoning them both. And also there was something inside of me that was like, you have to take care of yourself. You're going to destroy yourself if you turn around and go back.
Absolutely. You have to kind of hold on to that, a little bit of selfishness, in order to be able to, move forward and heal and grow and live your life, because essentially you didn't have a childhood.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what did you do to, kind of start combating those feelings with, the shame and the guilt and the rage?
Well, I would say for probably 6 or 7 years, I did nothing. I was like, I'm going to put these in a little box and I'm going to shove them over there and I'm going to pretend like it's all good.
Yep.
I sort of reinvented myself when I went to college, and I would, nobody knew about my past or my childhood. Nobody, so I didn't do anything about it for the longest time. And then when I started working after college, ironically, one of my first jobs was for the state mental health division in their children's inpatient psychiatric program. So
well, if that isn't the universe saying hello,
I know. So I found sort of another way to kind of be a caregiver, right? But in this way that I thought was sort of more remote, or, I could do it like from this real cerebral way. But the trauma caught up with me. I mean, not only was it incredibly difficult to witness these young people who had been put in these overwhelming situations, trauma and unsupportive families and all these different things, but I started to feel it in my body, right? I started to have panic attacks. I stopped being able to sleep. I was grinding my teeth. There just was, it became really clear to me that I was going to have to do something different. And then when I had my kids, I have two daughters that are 2.5 years apart. And I really wanted to be intentional about the way that I parented. I waited until I was 29 when I had my first daughter, and then 31 when I had my second daughter. I really wanted to be intentional about the way that I parented, but I realized all of the patterns and the lessons that I'd learned were born of this frantic survival, freak out, constant state of alert kind of state of being. And so I went to therapy, which was helpful, but I have to say one of the most important things I did was I found a community of women who got it. Other women. I have a friend, Becky, who was in a domestic violence situation in her first marriage. And she's, I think, 12 years older than I am. And she was this amazing mentor. I mean, neither one of us realized it at the time, but she was this person who taught me that it was okay to feel whatever I felt, and that I needed to just be really gentle with myself.
Yeah.
So finding a community of people who had the capacity to witness, and hear my stories and not judge and not take sides and not be like, oh my God, your mother was a horrible person. How dare she? Right. But just be like, that's huge. And let's sit with that for a little while.
Right.
Yeah.
That's crucial. I mean, there's nothing like having community or even just a few people that you can talk to who get it. Trying to talk to somebody who doesn't get it, who hasn't been through it, doesn't understand. You might as well just talk to a wall.
Yeah.
And it's not, anything against those people. It's just, they just can't comprehend what we feel, and, how our brains have changed because of trauma, and, how everything is different because of what we've gone through. So community is huge.
Yeah. And community of people who, like you said, who get it, right? Like the people who didn't either gaslight me and say, oh, but look, Pollyanna, it made you such a stronger person. Right.
Right.
Or the people who weren't like, well, here's what you should do about that. Right. I didn't need fixers, and I didn't need people who were uncomfortable with witnessing what I was going through. I needed people who understood the depth and the weight of the grief and the rage that I was feeling, and who would climb down into that ditch with me and sit there.
Yep. I get it. I didn't really have that with the majority of my traumas, but when Mark died, that was one of the first things I did, was sought out a widows group, and they helped me through about the first 2 months for sure, because, I couldn't go to my kids or anybody else with this constant, oh my God, I just want him back. I miss him so much.
Yeah.
They wouldn't understand. And it would almost be more of a burden to not a burden, but hard on them to see mom going through something and not being able to help, but
right.
Being able to go into and it was just on Facebook, being able to go into this group and whine and moan and not be judged for it, and just be heard and supported, was absolutely crucial those first couple of months. So
yeah, I mean, I think
support and community.
I think we pretend that grief is this really individual thing, and we have these sort of rules around how you're allowed to express your grief and for how long.
2 weeks. You get 2 weeks.
Right. And what kinds of things you're allowed to grieve. Certain, you can't grieve the loss of a friendship, but you could grieve the loss of an intimate relationship, or right. But if we aren't right now in the middle of this pandemic, in the biggest instance of collective grief that we've ever been in our lifetimes, I don't know what, that
Absolutely.
we need to learn, I think we need to learn to grieve together. We need to learn to bring all that stuff up and to recognize, right? Like, yeah, my dad died, 10 or 12 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I still have moments where I am completely knocked out by, I see a car that was his favorite kind of car, or, my oldest daughter's getting ready to graduate from college. And I guarantee you, while I'm sitting there watching her graduate from college, I'm going to just be like, oh, right. My parents aren't here to see this, know?
Yeah, I get it. My dad died in 2008 from lung cancer. And I have my moments where I'm just like, gosh, Dad, I miss you so much,
Yeah.
And my mom's gone too. So I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
And so tell us a little bit more about your book.
So it's really, it just sort of follows my evolution of, going through those same sort of circular phases again, right? It starts with the loss of my brother, and then just really follows me through all of that. One of the themes that I explore in that is like the different expectations that we have of mothers versus fathers, right? I was so pissed at my mom, and I wasn't as pissed at my dad. And yet he probably should have stepped up. He definitely should have stepped up. But really the biggest thing is around, it's around caregiving. It's around, what does it really mean? So I look at what it was like for me to take care of myself and my siblings when we were younger versus what it was like for me to take care of my children when I was in the throes of postpartum depression. And then what it was like for me to take care of my parents as they were dying, and how that sort of evolution, first of all, when it was a choice, it was so much more profound than if you're thrust into it. But second of all of the things I thought fell under the category of caregiving are not necessarily the most profound kind of caregiving, right? Like, for me to be able to sit with my mom when she didn't know who I was, and she was terrified because she couldn't remember anything, and she knew she couldn't remember it. But for me to be able to sit with her and put her favorite lotion on her hands and then have her smell that was like, you could just see her whole nervous system calm down. Right. Or for me to be able to sit with my dad when he was a Marine, he was, man's man kind of thing. And when he was dying, he was terrified. And for me to be able to sit with him and let him show me that he was scared and not have it affect my idea of who he was. So that's really what I explore in the book, is these ideas of like what it is to be with people when they're in trauma, and how I grew up thinking, well, I just need to fix everything. I just need to make sure all of your basic needs are met, and then we can solve all the problems one by one. And yes, in some cases that is really important caregiving, but in most cases, the most profound and loving kind of caregiving is that just being with.
Absolutely. And it's wonderful that you were able to be there for both of them in their final moments, and to be that support for them and the love and the nurture that they needed as they transitioned.
I think it was one of, especially with my dad, because my dad and I were estranged for many years. But we sort of reconciled the last probably 8 years before he died. So he got to be a grandfather to my kids, it was beautiful. And I think that being with him, he actually died in my arms. And that was one of the most healing things for me personally, was to have that experience where he trusted me enough to have me be the person who was with him when he died.
Yeah.
So as horribly painful as it was, I'm tremendously grateful that I had that. And I write about that in the book. I unfortunately was not able to be with my mom. She died in June of 2020, and she was in a nursing home. And so everything was locked down, and I was not able to be with her. But I'm just really grateful that I found people along the way who were willing to help me hold all of those great big emotions and help me metabolize them so that I didn't just like stuff them down in my body and keep thinking they would go away with enough time.
Yeah, no, instead they just kind of fester until they burst out.
Yeah.
So, well, excuse me, Kari, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me today. I can't believe our time is already up. It's just like flown by. So listeners, make sure you grab a copy of her memoir, Truth Has a Different Shape. You can also find Kari on her website at KariO'DriscollWriter.com. As always, everything will be in the show notes, so you can just head over to releasingtraumapodcast.com and pull up Kari's episode, and all of her contact information will be in the show notes for you. Kari, again, thank you so much for coming on and being open and sharing with us today. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your show.
Absolutely. And listeners, thank you for tuning in. We'll talk to you in the next show. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure you hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss a show. Be sure to check us out on our new socials on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.